Hi guys, Ricky Pope here, and this week on the Christian Nerds Unite podcast, I talk with Billy and JoJo Salyers about their Yellow Rose Forge, knife and swordsmithing, winning on Forged in Fire, and their ministry, Redeemed Steel. Plus, scripture and nerdy news, and we'll get to all of that right after this.
Hey nerds, this is David with Tatooine Sons, a pop culture podcast. We believe that pop culture is the mythology of our generation. There is a story, it is written on our souls, and that all of these myths speak to that story. And that is why every Tuesday I talk about Star Wars and Marvel and DC and Lord of the Rings and whatever nerdy things we can think of with my two sons, Sam and Nate. It is a 30 to 45 minute celebration of all the weirdness that we love so much. Basically, Mom said we couldn't talk about it at the kitchen table anymore, so we decided to start a podcast. We hope you'll check it out. It's on every podcast app out there. Tatooine Sons, that's Tatooine S-O-N-S.
Thanks so much for joining me every week. Hey, don't forget to go check out the other members of the Christian Nerd HQ podcast network. Tatooine Sons, Fangirling Over Jesus, The Reverend and the Reprobate, and the Speaking Nerdy podcast. Make sure you go to ChristianNerdHQ.com to follow all those podcasts and check out the Christian Nerd HQ YouTube channel for exclusive content that we're all making together. Well, I only have one verse for you this week. It's Proverbs 27:17. As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. With Billy and JoJo on the show, I thought this was appropriate. In just a bit, you're going to hear from them about their ministry, Redeemed Steel. That group of craftsmen work together to do more than they could ever do alone, sharpening one another. The question I have is, who are you helping sharpen, or who is helping sharpen you? I pray that you'll reflect on that this week. Now for some nerdy news. The live-action remake of The Little Mermaid has already knocked Fast 10 out of the #1 spot at the box office. With a domestic box office of $117 million over the long weekend and $185 million worldwide, places it at number 5 of the highest Memorial Day weekend film openings ever. Now, critic scores are kind of low at 67%, while the audience score is really favorable at 95%. Internationally, the film is not doing as well, and even in China, it's being beat by several films that have been out for a week or two. Now, Disney does have to wait and see if they can recoup their $250 million budget costs. But as of right now, it looks like they're probably going to get there, but it's not going to be an easy journey, especially overseas. It appears we have not seen the last of John Wick. Lionsgate has confirmed that John Wick 5 is in the early stages of production. Based on information during a quarterly earnings call, the John Wick 5 story is said to be growing out of the upcoming spin-off movies and television shows that are currently in the works. John Wick 5 will probably be in production over the next couple of years, so I wouldn't expect to see anything before 2025. Marvel's Deadpool 3 is going into production, but there could be a major snag. With the Writers Guild of America strike in full swing, there will not be any writers on set, and based on contracts, the actors must adhere strictly to the script. This will completely limit Ryan Reynolds' ability to improvise on set during shooting. Contractually, many fans are concerned that the overall results will not be as good as they could have been based on this. It is possible that the studio will stick with shooting those parts that would not have changed anyway, and after the writer's strike is over, shoot those other scenes that might have a little more improvisation. Another possibility is that since Reynolds is usually wearing a mask, that dialogue could be recorded after the fact and possibly after the writer's strike. My prediction is that the release of this film will eventually be delayed because of the writer's strike. A couple of weeks ago, I got to talk with Billy and JoJo Salyers, and I wanted to share that interview with you. Yellow Rose Forge is what grew out of what was supposed to just be a father and son project, but they have made it so much more. I really hope you will enjoy this interview. Billy and JoJo Salyers, it is so great to have you on the Christian Nerd Unite podcast today.
It's great to be here.
It's really awesome. Thank you for having us.
So, Billy or JoJo, some of my audience may not be super familiar with you. You guys were both on Forged in Fire. You've both won Forged in Fire. But tell us a little bit about who you guys are and what Yellow Rose Forge is all about.
Okay. Yeah, right now, Joseph and I are the only father and son Forged in Fire champions. I won the military tribute episode, season 7, episode 9. And JoJo, you won
Season 9, episode 18, The Notorious Naga was the name of mine.
And so, yeah, we own and operate Yellow Rose Forge, but we also run a nonprofit called Redeemed Steel. This kind of all snowballed together. This never was part of our plan. We were just hanging out as father and son with my other kids. One summer tried blacksmithing, and it kind of snowballed. And so now this is what we do for a living and for a ministry, and it's still our hobby too.
Awesome. So you guys have forged lots and lots of different things. What is kind of your specialty at Yellow Rose?
So I'll give mine, and then I guess you give yours.
Okay.
To date, we've made, at this point, we've lost count, thousands of knives and swords. Everything from just the simplest, kitchen knife that you can use to cut up a tomato to camp knives, hunting knives. But we also do a lot of really cool exotic stuff and even some pretty cool nerdy stuff. Right now, I'm in the process of doing the design to make the hook claws from Elden Ring for someone. So
nice. Pretty
much if it's got a blade on it, we make it. But our specialty is really high-end custom Damascus pieces. We forge our own steel. And my personal favorite to make are really fancy patterns in Damascus steel in large buoy type knives. That's kind of my fun thing. And then, of course, who doesn't like making swords? JoJo, how about you?
I would say that my personal favorite thing to make so far would be chef's knives. I mean, they're elegant to an extent. They're super, I think the word's usable. Like they've got anybody can use a kitchen knife, and so I love making those. The grinds on them they're a bit tricky, so they're a nice bit of a challenge, but they're super satisfying to finish as well. I've actually got, by the time this comes out, it will have already been my friend's birthday, but I'm in the process of making him a little chef's knife because he's a chef and does stuff like that.
And one of my favorite builds was a chef's knife. I actually made the shards of Narsil, but made it as a chef's knife. So the guard of the sword was actually a display stand, so the chef's knife slid through the guard, and then the top of the blade was broken up, but the cutting edge was just a French chef's knife. But it was all made to look like part of the blade that was broken that would be reforged. And my nephew, I think, ended up getting that one. It was, easily one of my favorite pieces.
Awesome. Now, I know you said earlier, you mentioned this really wasn't a plan. You didn't go into this thinking, we're going to start a business and that's going to be our livelihood and our ministry, and it's going to revolve around forging steel. So you and I talked a little bit off this call, and you told me a little bit about your story, but tell our audience a little bit about how this actually started. It was just like a project, right?
Yeah. The easiest way to become a millionaire as a knife maker is to start as a multimillionaire. I mean, doing this successfully is kind of like breaking into writing or acting. It's really difficult to do. And I was a school teacher. I've been in vocational ministry of some kind for 27, 28 years now. But my job was a school teacher. And so I had a couple of months off every summer, and we would always do a summer project. My dad was absent when I was a kid. He left when I was 2. And so I just wanted to be there for my kids. And so one of the ways that I did that was by doing projects with them to kind of force us to spend time together. But it also taught them new skills, stuff they could use, so they didn't have to pay somebody to do everything. And so, one year we learned carpentry and built a little sailboat out of plywood, cheap stuff, nothing expensive. We were using stuff from Harbor Freight. One year we started raising chickens. One year we built a 3D printer. The next year we used that 3D printer to build combat robots and actually competed in some BattleBot tournaments. And then that year that we built combat robots, we had about a month left over of summer and nothing to do. So I had my grandfather's anvil, my grandfather's hammers, his vise, and we had a little smelting furnace from when we had been melting aluminum a year or 2 before. And we said, let's turn that into a forge. Let's try blacksmithing. And we just fell in love with it, right?
Oh, I mean, I didn't expect to be cued in on that. But yeah, I mean, I kind of sucked at it at first. So it took me a while to get into it because, in all honesty, in most of our projects, I was not the hands-on kid. For most of the years, I kind of stood back and watched, and I helped where I could, but it wasn't a huge thing. But it wasn't until a few years later when we did another project of building our shop to actually house all the equipment we would eventually get that I really actually got into it, where I started to get semi-decent at swinging a hammer, doing things with my hands, and that really it took me a bit longer to pick up on it.
Yeah, and it really snowballed rapidly. I mean, it was just a project to spend time. We made the ugliest knife you have ever seen, and the sharpest spoon.
The sharpest spoon to ever be made.
But we just fell in love with it. And, so we started doing it more and more, and I'm a little OCD. So I was doing it like 20, 30 hours a week while I was teaching full-time at 2 different places. And then people started buying stuff like, we started giving out little crosses at Christmas for ornaments, but then people say, hey, can you make this for me? Sure. just buy the metal or, whatever. And the next thing you know, it was so busy. And in less than 2 years, we had people going, hey, why don't you go on Forged in Fire? And I'm like, well, what's Forged in Fire? I never heard of this. And so we looked that up. Oh, dude, that's a cool show. Sent out a couple of emails. Ended up on the spinoff show Knife or Death because they found that I was a martial artist who made my own blades. So I did that show, and then I did Forged in Fire, and I'd been smithing less than 2 years when I won that show, and it got to the point where I was just so busy making knives that I couldn't keep up with my job, my second job, and the bladesmithing, and so I quit one of the jobs. My night job at a college, and then the college called me the next day and said, hey, we'll cut your hours, raise your pay if you come back. I'm like, how do you say no to that? So I started praying about it, and I'm like, God, do I really need to leave my career, my full-time job? I've got a master's degree in literature. I love being a teacher. I'm good at being a teacher. Do I really need to leave that and become a full-time bladesmith? Like that just sounds crazy. Like, who leaves a career that with job security to become a knife maker? And so I fell asleep with that prayer on my lips. God, do I become a full-time bladesmith? And I woke up the next morning, a little blue light blinking on my phone. It was a notification from a comment on one of my knives on Facebook. And word for word, all it said was, imagine what he could do if he went full-time. And so... Wow. I called my wife and I go, hey, babe, I need to put in my notice at work. And finish out the semester, the school year, and leave my career as a teacher and become a full-time knife maker. And my wife's response was, well, it's about time you figured that out.
Nice. Well, so talk to me a little bit about the Forged in Fire experience. Now, Billy, you were on the show first, correct?
Yeah. So I was on season 7, episode 9, the military tribute episode. And honestly, one of the coolest things, having done a couple of TV shows now, that I can say about Forged in Fire is it really is what you see on the screen is a faithful adaptation of what actually took place in the competition. There's not a lot of Hollywood magic there. Really, the only big edit and cut that we see in my episode is when they say, your time starts now, go, and everybody runs. They tell you to run, and then they say, okay, stop, come back. Does anybody have any questions about what we're asking you to do? You get to ask questions, and then they say, okay, your time starts now, go. And then that 3-hour clock starts, and it doesn't stop for 3 hours.
Wow.
And, the 4 days at home is really only about 35 hours of work time. But the coolest thing about my episode was that it really was just an amazing time to make friends and to make connections with Christian brothers. There were several people in my episode who were Christians. We didn't realize that at the time. We just knew we were all bladesmiths and knife makers. But turned out that Robert Soria, who was competing with me in the finale, we were sitting in the airport on the way home to compete against each other for the final round, and found out we were both believers. And we kind of had this idea, okay, well, let's start a network. And that was the brainchild of Redeemed Steel, which, we'll get to later, I'm sure. Yeah, it was a cool thing. I mean, you get to make these enormous knives out of ridiculous materials. I mean, I got to make a knife out of a tank. Who gets to do that, right? And then you get the ballistics gel dummies or the pig carcass, and you get to do stuff with it that you don't normally get to do at home. And I think the judges really understand that they've got the best job in the world. They're just a bunch of dads who are having the time of their life, being big kids. And that's really what it was like. For us, I went into it with the mindset, I've only been knife making for less than 2 years. If I lose, nobody knows who I am, so it doesn't really hurt me. If I win, that's great. But the thing that I asked God to do for me in that episode as I went in is I said, God, I don't want to embarrass myself. I don't want to do something stupid and break my knife in half. But more importantly, I don't want to embarrass you. I want to conduct myself like a Christian throughout the entire experience, because at the end of the day, I want to bring you honor and glory through this experience. And I got to do that. I got to not only share my faith, do good things, behave in a way that I think honored God on my episode, but people were welcome to that. People were receptive of that, and at the end of the day, I still got to win too, which was pretty cool. So I would do it again in a heartbeat. Joseph had a little bit of a different experience, still a good one, but different than mine, because when he filmed, you guys were the whole filming process was different from me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so a little background for when I went. I had just gotten back. I'd lived in Guatemala for 9 months prior. I got home June 14th of 2021, and then about 2 months later, or 2.5 months later, they finally called me and was like, hey, you're going to do your episode and do all that. So this is kind of still in the middle of the pandemic. So they bring us in, and unfortunately, the only part that was really different in my episode than it was in his was the competitors didn't really get to interact all that much, because you had your own separate trailers that you had to stay in. You had the 6-foot rule. You had to wear a mask the whole time, which, I mean, could have been worse, but we just missed out on getting to have that fellowship with each other, which we still, once you finish filming, we would go out to dinner, and after that, you'd go out to your rooms and things like that. And I actually got to meet the guy who was competing against me, Chris Smith, a phenomenal guy and a great bladesmith. He's a Christian too. And I got to actually talk with him a little bit in between the episodes. So Filming was about the same. The only thing that was different was, okay, you have to wear a mask while you film, or you can take it off while you're at your anvil, but that was a lot of work, so I just left mine on the whole time. And yeah, it was just really fun. The first part was really easy. I struggled a lot with the second round because I'm not great with handles. But
you're way better now.
I'm a lot better now. I had only been home for 4 months, so that's my excuse. But I really just wasn't great at them to begin with. So, but it was a good time. The judges were really kind, especially after the final round. I actually got to talk to some of them, and I was kind of down about what I had made. And then, David Baker walks up. He's like, "Hey, how many swords have you made?" I was like, "I've made 3." He's like, "You did great. Don't worry about it." Just awesome, dude. So it was a really fun experience, and it was just the time, doing it with other people, getting to actually compete in something that most people wouldn't be able to compete in was just really, really fun.
Yeah,
Awesome.
It was a great experience for both of us.
Very cool. Well, my friends over at the Reverend and the Reprobate podcast, they are part of. We're both part of the Christian Nerd HQ podcast network now, and they've actually had Dave on their show a couple of times. So
really?
He's a great guy from what I have been told and from what I've seen on their podcast. So JoJo, I wanted to tell you a little bit about what I told Billy. When I found your episode, when I found out about you guys, somebody in my Christian Nerds Unite podcast Facebook group had mentioned Yellow Rose Forge. And I thought, that's interesting. I'll check it out. And I find you guys, and I find out that I had been told that you were a father-son winning, Forged in Fire. And I thought, that's interesting. I don't ever remember hearing about a father-son team-up competition. And then I find out, no, you won both separately. So I found your episode, JoJo. I found yours first.
Okay.
And you made a Naga sword, which I found absolutely fascinating because I have actually been to the very, very far eastern part of India, Imphal, that area of India where the Naga people actually live. I actually did, for 2 weeks, we did a pastor's conference to the Naga people, teaching pastors about leadership and, Bible skills. And missionaries had been kept out of that area of India for many, many, many years. And they were just starting to get the opportunity to go back in. We were allowed to go in as a group, and we met many of the Naga people. The Naga people are actually very much evangelized. It's a weird part of India. They're about 90 to 95% Christian, wow. And they're not really. They almost consider themselves a different country from India, but they're part of India and they don't have much choice about it. But it's a fascinating group of people who, up until about 100 years ago, were still a headhunting tribal community. So that it was awesome for me to see you build a Naga sword, because I've actually seen some they weren't real Naga swords that I saw. They were more like trinkets that people made to sell to tourists like me. But it was just fascinating to know I've been with that group of people, and that you actually made the sword that they would have used at the time. So it was kind of a cool connection for me.
That's so cool. I love that. Hey, God works things in crazy ways, and
absolutely.
Hey, made trinkets. That was the hardest thing I've made to date. So good on them.
So that was the story that I had told Billy earlier that I was going to share with you on the show today. But I want to know more about this redeemed steel. So you guys have created this business, Yellow Rose. You're making you're making knives. You're selling it. It's a business. You're making a living. But you wanted to do ministry at the same time. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So Yeah, Yellow Rose Forge just kind of literally sprung out of the necessity of, it's either stop knife making or make a living at it. We were overwhelmed with anything else. And so, yeah, that kind of became what we did. But as Christians, as believers, everything we do is supposed to be, at least the way that I view my life, supposed to be an act of worship, honor, and glory to God. So if I'm going to spend my life making knives, how can I make knives for the honor and glory of God? And so JoJo had it. Why don't you tell us about how you ended up in Guatemala, and then I'll kind of bring that into how Redeemed Steel was actually born, because it was kind of born in Guatemala.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I went and lived in Guatemala. I lived there for 9 months, from November of 2020 to June of 2021. And that was a lot of God working in me. So there had been a lady who had invited me to youth after a college trip, after we were going to look at colleges. So I was about 17 at the time, at the end of my junior year. And so I start going to youth. I start, and I had been away from my faith a lot at this time. So this was really God kind of, bringing me back in, getting me interested in, his people and the things that he values. And so we go to youth, and I was only there for a few months, but in that short time, they had a video one night about missions. And, it was like in Minnesota or something like that. I don't even remember the state, but I remember watching it and going, that's cool. I'd love to do something like that. And so I had read a passage of scripture the day beforehand. It was about Joseph talking to Pharaoh about his dream that said, this happened twice because it was from God. And so I just drive home, and I'm in my head going, okay, I've seen it once. God, if you want me to know, just show me, And it's kind of one of those, I'm young in my faith, one of those one-off prayers. It's like, okay, I don't actually think anything's going to come from this. But, thankfully God, goes over my expectations, because I arrive home and there's this random car in our driveway, and I'm like, who the heck's here at like 8 o'clock at night? And so I get in, and it's this couple from a church that's like 40 minutes away that we had met a few years ago. And I'm like, oh, hey, I recognize you guys. They're like, yeah, we're here talking to your parents. We're with an organization called Global Year, and they're a organization that takes kids coming out of high school and sends them to another country to be missionaries before they go to college.
So there was twice.
So there was the second time.
So JoJo ended up in Guatemala, and we were going to go visit him for Parents Week down there. And I had met another family from Guatemala. He'd actually come up and visited the shop and made a knife with me. And he said, hey, when you come down, why don't you stay an extra week, stay with us, and we'll do some blacksmithing and share the gospel. And we're like, cool, let's do that. And so we went to Guatemala, and we got the most rudimentary setup we could possibly do. And I went somewhere, and we made a knife. And we saw, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 people come to Christ. We take this shapeless, ugly bar of steel, and we transform it into this beautiful tool that can, it's not only, a work of art, but it's something useful that has a practical purpose. And we did that in English and Spanish, because my Spanish, still not great, but it was really, really bad at the time. And so we had a translator there. It took about 3 hours. And what we found was that especially men, but everybody really, they were just glued to it. They couldn't take their eyes off the presentation. We were drawing in people. This was, again, it was kind of at the pandemic phase. And they tried to make the event open only to men, because they said, well, we can only have so many people, and we'll just open it to the men. And the women in Guatemala got so upset that they just had to say, no, we're going to open it to everybody. And we had, 200 people there. And a lot of people came to Christ. And so from there, we had already determined that, we were going to use this to share the gospel. And so what started is, me and Robert with this idea in an airport. This goes back to my Forged in Fire experience. On my way back for round 3, they lost my sword at the airport.
Oh,
Yeah. So they ended up putting me on a
wow.
different plane. And when I get to the airport in New Jersey, I'm 9 doors down from where I'm supposed to be, and my sword's nowhere to be found. And because I was on a different plane, I'm now like 45 minutes earlier than I was originally going to be there. And so I run around madly. And so I end up finally getting the sword. I'm now 30 minutes early and 9 doors away from where I should be. So, just for a little context here. So wrong time, wrong place. And somebody behind me sees my shirt. My shirt said, "My knife and my life are both forged from redeemed steel." And he yells at me, "Hey, how long you been forging?" And I turn around and go, "Almost 2 years. Why?" And his buddy says, "This guy's a forged and fire champion." I said, "Well, I hope I am. I won't know till tomorrow." And he says, "Well, I'll pray for you." And I go, "You're a Christian?" He goes, "Yeah." And so that's where I met Jeremiah Backhouse, 9 doors down, 30 minutes early,
Wow.
he's in a typewriter kind of thing. And so he said, "Have you met Brian?" I'm like, "Brian who?" "Brian Evelich." "Dude, Brian's coming from Connecticut to Asheville, North Carolina next week. I've got a dinner scheduled with him." So Brian became the 4th member of Redeemed Steel. And to date now, I think the last time I checked the numbers, we got about 325 members of the Redeemed Steel network, and dozens and dozens of professional craftsmen, blacksmiths, bladesmiths, welders, woodworkers, leather workers, all of these people who are using their gifts and talents for the kingdom. And that presentation we did in Guatemala, we've now done all over the country in Guatemala. Probably 6 or 8 times in Guatemala we've done it. Probably another half dozen or dozen times in Costa Rica. We've done it in several places in the States. We've got invitations to come to Panama, Mexico, Michoacan, Mexico, Nicaragua, all over Latin America. We're in the process of setting up a trip to Romania. Once the war ends, we've got open doors in Ukraine. There's a remote part of Alaska wanting us to come. And all of it's based on the idea of people are so attracted to this message of taking something that's made out of garbage and turning it into something that's priceless. And what nobody ever really gets when we first start is that it's not the shaping process that makes it valuable. It's not the finished product that makes it special. The first thing that we always do is we give them a couple of pieces of steel to choose from. One's usually pretty, one's usually ugly. Everybody always picks the ugly one. The ugly one usually turns out to be Damascus as well, just because I like to throw that in there.
You're revealing our secrets.
But the thing that makes the steel special is when they choose it, right? I mean, everything else is just transformation. It's not about making a perfect knife. Nobody's going to make a perfect knife in 3 hours. But once we choose that piece of metal, it now has a purpose. It now has a mission. It now can go through the transformation process. And that's really what Redeemed Steel is all about. It's about sharing the fact that you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be cleaned up. All you have to be is chosen, and then God will spend the rest of your life transforming you. And so through that network, through knife makers and blacksmiths, that is mostly funded through us and other bladesmiths like us who just donate our time and money. We do have some donors who give monthly donations and things like that. But through the funds that have come in, we've built at least half a dozen houses for the homeless in Guatemala. Last year in November, we fed a village of 500 people enough food for 2 weeks. We gave them 3,000 pounds of food that we bagged up and individually distributed to families. We've shared the gospel with literally thousands of people and probably seen hundreds of people come to know Christ. I've been in ministry for 27 years, and in the past 3 years, I've seen more people come to Christ than the previous 24. And the fact that God's using knife making to do it just blows my mind every time I see him do it. I don't know why he's allowing us to be a part of this, but it's humbling and it's so exciting to be a part of it. So yeah, that's Redeemed Steel in a nutshell. We are currently, because of what we've seen God doing, we're now in the process of kind of casting a bigger vision, and we're building our first trade school in Guatemala. We're actually building a training center here in North Carolina as well. But the trade schools are designed to help orphans who are aging out of the orphanage with no life skills, who either end up in the sex trade or drug industries, and we're going to teach them welding and carpentry, not necessarily blacksmithing at all, but welding and carpentry, because you can make a living as a welder anywhere in the world. And then give them a place to use those skills so that they can then make a life for themselves outside of those, dangerous, illicit areas that they might otherwise end up in. And now that's the Romania, the Alaska, the other places, because they found out that we were doing that. We've already got about 6 other countries lined up waiting for us to come build there. And we haven't even been able to pour the concrete yet on the first school. So,
wow.
It's an exciting, incredible journey so far.
God is definitely doing something with both of you and with your skills. And I love to hear about this kind of thing. I am a big proponent of everyone using their nerdy skills for God in some way, shape, or fashion. And I am thoroughly convinced no matter what nerdy skill you have, there's a way to use it.
This is definitely a nerdy skill. I don't know how many other people get to play around with, recreating blades and things from their favorite movies. I mean, come on. We were all kids with sticks running around in the backyard pretending to have swords, and now we're just big kids swinging real swords. It's just a lot of fun.
Oh my goodness. Well, is there anything else that either one of you are involved in that is kind of in those nerdy veins?
I mean, not necessarily. I'm trying to think. I don't think I have anything ministry based going on that's in those nerdy veins. But I mean, I play D&D every Tuesday.
Yeah,
not a bad thing.
My gaming buddies. Goodness gracious, we've been getting together every Friday or Saturday now for 27 years, I think.
Wow.
We miss some every now and then, and we stay so busy traveling that we don't always make it. But yeah, we are constantly involved in as much nerdiness as we possibly can be. We love it all: science fiction, fantasy, anime, gaming, film, YouTube. I mean, we love all of it. We embrace that whole culture. Every now and then we do get to go to some cons. One of my favorite con stories is I went with a buddy of mine who owned a paintball field, and we all dressed up in Monty Python and the Holy Grail outfits. And we had a full-size Trojan bunny. And when we pulled up to the hotel with the full-size Trojan bunny, Terry Gilliam, who was in the hotel and had like a 2-hour wait line to meet him, heard about us, left the hotel and came outside and had his picture taken with us.
Oh my goodness. That is amazing.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. Goodness. Yeah. I think pretty much everything that's not ministry based in our lives is pretty much nerdy. We just love it all and try to stay as involved in it as we can.
That is awesome. Well, I have a couple of things that have come to mind that I just want to ask. They're not ministry, they're just curiosity. You talked about flying with a sword. How do you travel with a long-bladed weapon?
It's not easy. And I've had them confiscated or lost a couple of times. Typically, I put swords in rifle cases. And so then the inevitable question comes up when I go to check the bag. Has this got a gun in it? And then well, no, it doesn't. Well, does it have a weapon in it? Yes, it does. Well, wait a minute. I thought you said it didn't have a gun. It doesn't. And then what happens is somebody at the airport doesn't pay attention to the fact that the paperwork says this doesn't have a gun in it. So then they lock it in a locker somewhere because they think it's got a gun. Then my bag gets lost. And, then I find it 3 days later at a different airport because it didn't get treated like because it's totally legal to fly with swords. But the only thing they'll fit in is a gun case. And so then trying to get the airlines to recognize that, yes, it's a gun case, but it doesn't have a gun in it is kind of a tricky thing.
I have a story about that from my Fortune Fire story because I had the same gun case for my Naga sword, but I think I just had a backpack for like my clothes and everything. So if you win they keep your sword. So I'm now flying back with a completely empty gun case. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to put my clothes in the gun case. That way I don't have to carry them on my back. And so I get to the New York airport and I go to check it in. And they're like, is there a gun in it? I'm like, no, there's just clothes. And they're like, are you sure there's not a gun in it? I'm like, there's just clothes in there. And then the lady behind the counter leaves to go get some other guy, and she brings him over, and he's like, hey, is there a gun in this? I'm like, no, there's clothes. You can open it, look for yourself. And then they open it, and there's just clothes in it, and they start sifting around looking for something that's there.
I wouldn't have touched those underwear.
So it's just one of those things of like sometimes it's just tricky getting them there. I mean, clothes, swords, you know.
And when we go overseas, we're constantly taking tools. So we'll have bags full of grinders. I've got a forge design, and I swear the Lord woke me up at 3 a.m. with this design in my head. I drew it up in CAD. We built it that weekend, and it just works, and it breaks down and fits in a checked bag on an airplane.
Wow.
And so we'll take those overseas and then leave them there. And we'll take grinders, we'll take hammers and tongs, and, I'll have 50, 75 pounds of steel in my luggage, never have a single problem. But as soon as I put it in a gun case, it gets confiscated or lost.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, okay, I mean, you have a suitcase full of knives, but, if it's a gun case full of knives, that's a different thing.
Oh my goodness. So my other question is, if there is someone out there who has some skills and has considered going into some sort of smithing like this, where do you recommend somebody go to start looking at this, to think about getting involved? Even if it's just, as a hobby, kind of like you guys, not necessarily as a business, you just wanted to do some projects.
Yeah, so I would say the best option to do if you're just like piddling around, wanting to get into it, to see if you're interested before even buying your own tools necessarily, I would say go find some guy in your area who does it already. Because in our case, there is actually a blacksmiths group in our area that they just do blacksmithing. They're not all bladesmiths or anything, but they're just a bunch of old guys who love sharing their knowledge with people who are getting into their craft. I mean, one of the best smiths I know, Robbie Bratton, he's just like, hey, you guys are getting into this. I'd love to have you guys come down to my shop. I'll teach you a few things, get you guys started. And I actually made my first railroad spike knife with him because we had stuff at our shop, but he had like a power hammer and all these different tools. He had a fly press and all this stuff that we couldn't afford it at the time, but he was teaching us and showing us.
He's also a total nerd because at 70 years old as a retired welder, he hates cutting his grass, so he built a robot to do it for him.
That is true.
I recommend take a class. If you're near us, come take a class with us. If you're not near us, find a qualified professional smith that teaches classes. And when somebody comes to our shop and we do a one-day class, they'll learn in one day what took us a year and a half to learn on our own. And it costs you like $250. I mean, that's about the going rate for most places. You can go anywhere, spend a couple $100, take a class, and leave with something that you made with your own two hands. The great thing about that is you don't have to buy any of the tools. You don't have to buy any of the materials, the equipment. If you hate it, you never have to do it again. All you've lost is a little bit of time and a little bit of money. And if you love it, now you have an idea of, okay, which tools did I like? Which tools do I need? What skills do I know that I don't have? What skills do I know that maybe I do have already? And you can kind of start piecing that together because it can be quite an expensive hobby to get into if you kind of go the route that we did, which is obsessive by everything you can possibly imagine, and just take it to the extreme. But it doesn't have to be. I mean, a few $100s, skip a coffee here or there. Don't buy that next set of clubs, or, wait a couple of months when they release the next Xbox. And you can get into it. Mine's my movie budget. As you can see, I've started buying them on digital because I'm out of space for my discs. But you skip a couple of movie releases, or at least put them on hold till they go into the $9 bin. And you can buy most of the stuff that you need to start this hobby. But yeah, a class is totally the way to go because that lets you taste it to see if you like it before you really have to dig in.
Very cool. Now, I know you have a couple of big events that are coming up here in the next few weeks. Based on this recording, I'm not sure exactly when this will be released, but give our audience just a little bit about what's coming up for you guys.
Okay. You want to do the first one?
Well, I'm going to check my phone, make sure I actually know when it is.
It's the first weekend of June.
Well, there's like a few days. What days is it?
It's actually? June 2nd, 3rd, and 4th.
Okay, so there we go. Now we figured that out. June 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. For anybody who's a knife nerd, if you like weapons or blades or things like that, Blade Show is actually coming in Atlanta, Georgia. So Blade Show is the biggest knife show on the East Coast.
No, it's the biggest knife show in the world.
Oh, crap, in the world. So it's the biggest knife show in the world then. So, and it's going to be going on for those 3 days. We're going to have tables 36 and 37K.
Okay. Yep.
So we're going to be there. We're going to be showing off, hopefully, some chef's knives, some Bowie knives, things like that. And that's one of our bigger events because you'll have thousands of people coming in from all over the world to come just look at knives. There will be master smiths there. We're not master smiths, but we'll be there. There will be some really talented makers there. There will be a lot of really cool pieces there. So
a lot of nerdy stuff there too.
Yes,
I mean, I'm making a couple of pieces that we're going to take. I've got my signature blade is currently called Old Painless. It was the Gatuda Chopper, which of course is from the movie Predator. Gatuda Chopper. And then I wanted to make something bigger and badder than the Gatuda. And, of course, the minigun in the movie Predator is called Old Painless because they say it's time to let Old Painless out the bag. And so I had a guy who picked up one from me last year. This year he's getting one with a keyhole handle.
Oh, he's actually got it here.
Oh, wow.
So really, really cool knife. But these two knives are actually going to get paired together in this angel wing double back sheath so that the guy can wear them and they latch onto his back with magnets. And so he's going to be wearing that around the show. And it's just going to be super, super fun. I can't wait to reveal that one at the show. But yeah, it's a really fun time. It's like I said, it's the first weekend in June. But our biggest event of the year is July 15th. And that is our, what we call a hammer-in and a knife show. This is the first year we've done the knife show. And this is the 5th annual Redeemed Steel Hammer-In. It's going to be at the Tryon International Equestrian Center in Mill Spring, North Carolina. We're expecting 2,000 or 3,000 people to come through that day. We're going to have dozens of custom makers there, probably a dozen or more Forged in Fire champions and finalists who are going to be there. We're going to be doing a Battle of the Bladesmiths, so it's kind of like me watching an episode of Forged in Fire on site that day. And at the end of the day, we're going to give away probably thousands of dollars worth of knives, equipment, tools, stuff like that, through raffles, through drawings, through giveaways, through auctions. We'll be doing those things. And every penny that we raise that day will go to doing mission work. It'll specifically probably go toward funding the trade school that we're building in Guatemala. Right now, we need about $100,000 to finish building that school. We've got about 30. So we need to raise another 70 grand. And so all the funds that we raise on July the 15th through that event will go to doing that. Last year we had Walter Sorrells and Bert Foster. Bert Foster is an ABS master smith. Walter Sorrells is probably one of the finest Japanese sword makers in the world. We've made Tamahagane steel from sand and charcoal at these events. And we always find something really creative, really cool to do. Demoing, we give people the opportunity to try it hands-on as well. And it's just a lot of fun. But like I said, every penny of it goes to raising money for the ministry. And that's our biggest event of the year. So that's July 15th.
Awesome. Well, if people want to keep up with you, with Yellow Rose, or with Redeemed Steel, where can they go to find you guys?
They can go to Facebook and Instagram. Those are really easy. So, at Yellow Rose Forge, at Redeemed Steel. They can also go to yellowroseforge.com for our business, and they can go to redeemedsteel.com for the ministry, where they can watch videos, sign up to our newsletters, or even sign up to become partners with monthly giving toward the missions that we do.
Awesome. Well, and I'll put links to that in the show notes as well. Billy, JoJo, it has been great having you on the Christian Nerd Unite podcast today.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having us.
It's been awesome to be here.
It's been great getting to know Billy and JoJo over the last few weeks. If you want to keep up with the Yellow Rose Forge or Redeemed Steel, click on the links down in the show notes below. Well, that's all I have for you today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, just click all those buttons down there. That way you can keep up with us and get all of the new content as we release it. You can find all of our social links and links to our YouTube channel and to our online store at ChristianNerdsUnite.com. If you enjoy the show and want to help even more, consider becoming a supporter on Patreon. We've changed all of our Patreon levels, and every level has great benefits and makes a huge difference in the ministry we're able to do. Supporters will also get to hear exclusive stories of believers we're serving around the world through our ministry partners. To check it out or to partner with us, go to patreon.com/ChristianNerdsUnite or ChristianNerdsUnite.com and click on the support menu. And check out ChristianNerdHQ.com for even more great nerdy podcasts. Before you go, I do want to leave you with this blessing from Romans 15. May the God who gives endurance and encouragement give you the same attitude of mind toward each other that Christ Jesus had, so that with one mind and one voice you may glorify the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. We'll see you next week. Blessings.
Hey.